Hi everyone, we are Carcosa Dreams and we are here to answer your questions. And this is Ozzy. Hi everyone, we are Carcosa Dreams and we're here to answer your questions. I'm Ian.
I'm Anthony.
I'm Aquarian.
I'm Helen.
And I'm Rob.
What 3 fiction or non-fiction books would you recommend reading to understand Alba?
Yeah, cool. I wrote the game, so I can go first, I guess. That is a hard question. I'm going to preface it by saying that I have a very bad memory and I don't read many books because I read very slowly. But I would definitely say Sun Horse, Moon Horse by Rosemary Sutcliffe. Rosemary Sutcliffe writes a lot of historical inspired fiction, usually around Britain. I think she did quite a lot of Roman stuff, but she did one book called Sun Horse, Moon Horse, which was inspired by the chalk horse on the Chalk Downs, and a sort of fiction fantasy sort of story about how that came into being and why it's there. That's a really good book. And is kind of like one of my inspirations for ancient Britain. What else? Anything by Karen Maitland is great. It is not period appropriate, but it has that dark British fantasy feel to it. It has the feel of the real world mixed with a fantasy superstition, and that's great. Other than that, read a lot of the historical kind of sagas and stuff. There you go. Somebody else?
I took a lot of inspiration from Robert Holdstock from the Mythical Woods series, from the Rye Woods series. I'd also flag up anything by Alan Garner. And probably the Mabinogion. I mean, it's got a whole slew of myths and legends that we drew quite heavily on, and it gives a very good feel for the kind of mood that we're looking for in the game. That very boastful, I am a hero and here is the big list of things that I have done mood that's supposed to pervade the game.
So, I mean, I'd in fact go for a lot of the old myths and legends books, not so much for the direct inspiration for understanding the history of Alba, because you won't, because it's different to that. But more for getting the idea of the rhythm of how stories are told in that style, because a central part of Alba is going to be telling the stories that then get recorded forever. And therefore, it is good to know how to make your story one for the ages in the style of those great myths and legends.
Some ones that I would recommend, going back to Alan Garner, I've got Alan Garner collected folk tales. And also this one is a bit of a rare find. Folklore, myths and legends of Britain. When I've written bits and pieces for Alba, what I've typically done though is I've just looked online and did like traditional folk tales, myths and folklore, anything to do with the British Isles. So there's no one specific book, I think, for myself.
I picked up this really good book when we first started researching, which is the Mammoth Book of Celtic Myths and Legends. Mm-hmm. I think it crosses over with some of the other books the guys we spoke about, but it's got a lot of that mythology and that idea of how gods walk around and how people react with magical beings, and in that kind of very British way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the old Celtic fairy tales of what happens when you interact with somebody of a different world to yours, and misunderstandings and that kind of thing that are at the heart of things that might happen at Alba in the future. But yeah, cool. Any other points on that, or should we move on?
Let's move on.
If you had to roll up a character for one of your games, what would you play? Rob, you can start this one.
It's quite a hard one to answer because when you write NPC, sometimes you do kind of write that thing you want to play.
Yeah.
So I think one of them which got mistimed really badly was the drug seller at T67, who was the end of the event. Everything's calmed down. He turns up with a little fold-out pouch full of drugs to sell. But at that point, all the players have run off. So what was the player base? And I think I've used quite a lot of mine. I remember someone asking about Forsaken, what they'd like to play, and one of them, someone played at one of the 7 days events, which was an artist who had met angels during the first start of Forsaken, and their only power really was believing in angels, and they drew them. So yeah, I think I'll probably use mine. Ellie, what do you play?
I would play a warrior at Alba. I would play the warrior archetype, but I would actually sit in camp and spin some yarns. Because I don't know, I've spent a lot of my life playing very proactive characters that do a lot of stuff, and I would really enjoy, I think, a chance to just sit back and watch the world go by. And I think Alba would be a great world to watch go by, given that so much of the emphasis of the play is on creating stories and retelling those stories.
Yeah.
I think for Alba, it would be hard to avoid the inveterate show-off coming out, so I'd probably end up playing a druid. Although Heli's warrior who sits in camp and tells stories has a lot of appeal to it. The older I've got, the less inclined I've got to run around. So having people come to me to hear something has a certain amount of appeal. For the other games on the roster, I tend to focus on short, sharp stuff nowadays. So something that would arrive, have a quick impact, and then be gone.
I think if it for Alba, I'd probably do something like a shaman, and I would take lots of drugs and be very loud and trippy balls at people. I would, because I like to play characters that are very intense but brief, rather than sort of long burn. But then I think that's because when I write NPCs, I kind of write them to sort of fit into gaps to do things, rather than when I write things for the entire experience. If I was going to do something for T67, I would definitely like to play something very depressive and angsty, probably with lots of modifications and cranking up the emo because the little goth boy that I am. If I was doing something for the Sisyphus, I couldn't say which one I would pick because reasons. I think though that Tabula Rasa, a similar thing as well. There are some very interesting characters that are in there that I would love to play, but we couldn't really mention on here unless people were coming to book afterwards. And I think for give me another one.
I think that's it for a current roster at the moment.
I mean, Dead Air is the last one, but there isn't anything out there on it yet. So
Okay.
You've got a month or two before anything comes out for Dead Air.
Well, we can cut that out. Oh no, but if one thing that I would definitely say is if I was going to play, not NPC, but if I was going to play at Dead Air, I would definitely probably either be some sort of Gerbaton. No, what's the name of them?
Creaman.
Creaman, absolutely Creaman. Or something that gets to lick the Fae a lot.
I mean, I would, for Alba, you would pry druidism from my cold dead hands.
I've had experience of that sort of thing.
That is the kind of role that I would tend to play. For Forsaken, I would almost certainly go in as low combat pastoral style priest to basically listen to people's problems and say, well, why aren't you doing anything about it then? And point them at the places where they should then go and do something about them. For T67, I somewhat guiltily have yet to play a T67 event or be involved in it, so I'm not entirely sure where my game would be in that. And for Sisyphus, Tabula Rasa, Dead Air, anything else we do, I will go where they point me because I'm going to be NPCing those for the rest of the time. Okay. Okay, this is going to be fun. How do you tell a good story when you don't know what your players are going to do? Ian.
Since Ian has views.
How do you tell a story if you do know what your players are going to do? Not knowing what your players are going to do is the core of the fun. It's why I'm in it. We were talking about this last week, I think, and a couple of us agreed that the best time at an event is 2 o'clock in the morning when the players have just driven a flaming bus through everything you had planned, and you have 3.5 hours to completely rebuild your event, if you're lucky, possibly your entire campaign structure, in such a way that no one notices.
Yep.
That is the best fun ever.
It is very much the best type 2 fun ever, because in the meaning in the actual event it tends to, you know, be a wet socks kind of event, but yeah, in general, so to some extent you know roughly what your players' options are, because generally the players will be able to do one of these sets of things that you have told them they're able to do, or they will pick the mysterious something else, and they will try and pick the I want that cake and that cake and that cake option, and they will risk everything to see if they can get all the good stuff with none of the bad stuff. The trick is in basically forelabeling the fact that you can't have all the different kinds of cake at the same time. You are going to have to stomp on one of them. But also, when somebody does come in with a thing that you hadn't thought of, there's something else where they have noticed a bit of your metaphysic, realized how it works in a way that you hadn't considered was going to be effective, and then flaming bus straight through it, is then to stop, say, yeah, actually that would work, and not to sit there making up bullshit reasons why the players don't have any agency anymore.
Absolutely. I think expanding off that, we have found through many years of trial and error that sometimes if you write a story and you hedge and nudge that it's going to be option A or option B, and we've found through experience that you have to make it explicitly clear if there is a choice, that they have to make a choice. They can't try and please both sides. Sometimes things are put in place where you have to make a definite decision and you can't equivocate.
Yeah.
However, even though you may kind of stack the deck in your favor, so you have option A or option B, there are still times when players then come back with, given option A or option B, they come back with what I call option banana, which is completely unrelated to anything that you possibly imagined, but still actually fits. I love this for two different reasons. First of all, it just reminds me that the players are smarter than I anticipate and smarter than me, and I love that. But also another thing that I enjoy too, as well as their creative ways around stuff which I hadn't considered, but also then being up at 2 o'clock in the morning, or having to then me be clever and find some way to crowbar all the things in to make it look like, yes, you know what, we can do that for you, and we will make it lie flat and seamless as possible, and you may never know that that was never the plan that we arrived with, because we're constantly laying tracks in front as we're going down the train.
Yeah.
But that's part of our experience. So we will anticipate and set some set pieces and ideas for these options, but then we will try and work around to make things fit if an option turns up that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. But we don't go in knowing this is exactly what's going to happen, but we do write plots and ideas based on what we think is likely to happen for the options that we present to the players. So that's how we tell our story.
Yeah,
you choose your own adventure.
So it says the actual question: how do you tell a good story when you don't know what your players are going to do? You tell a story with what the players are going to do, or what the players have done.
So for me, I think that the first and most important thing, and I think this informs most of how I approach the bit of LARP that I write, is that I'm not telling a story. I am telling part of a story, and I'm telling it with everyone else. And I try and approach LARP in that way, and I try and remind myself to not be precious, to not have expectations for where the story will go, and to try and gear my effort towards the front end of the writing. So I will set up a situation, and I will try not to spend too much time working out the middle and end. So I will write the beginning of a story, but then I will sketch out some ideas for a middle and an end, but I will try not to anticipate too much or to be too specific in what I think is going to happen, because that isn't the bit I write. That's the bit that the players come up with and then I react to. And my method is more around allowing the players to interact with what I've created, react to it, make choices, and then I will react to those choices. And I mean, often what will then happen is that, at 2 a.m. we throw the plot document in the bin and we go, what the shit are we going to do? But that's generally the point at which they've done something so completely off the charts that everything that we had planned for Sunday interactions, NPCs, anything like that, is suddenly out of the window, because those things, if we go down and follow what the players have done, all the things that we had planned, we can't do any of those. We cannot set up any of those things. We cannot begin any of those new plots, because the players suddenly aren't in the world anymore. They are in outer space, or they are on the moon, or something like that. So I try to not put too much time and effort into planning out sort of the second half of the arc of the story, whichever way an arc goes, because A, it's never going to happen, and B, because then that allows my kind of input into the process to not feel like I've wasted a lot of my time. So how do you make a good story out of something when you don't know what's going to happen? Well, I don't know, we roll the dice every time, I guess. I'm certainly there for rolling those dice to see what comes out. As long as you can kind of keep it within the theme. And players, I find, are extremely good at picking up on the narrative beats and the themes which you are going for with a LARP, and they're very open to that. So often you write a good story because everyone there is open to telling a good story, and they want something satisfying, and they will reach for that satisfying conclusion. They will make interesting decisions, and most of the time that has pretty much nothing to do with me, and I'm okay with that.
And inside a secret, which might get killed for saying, we stopped writing Sundays quite a while ago. So where we've got 3-day events, which is regularly Forsaken and Alba, the thing with Alba is we've got the structure of the storytelling for those who have been. That was it midday we did it? Midday is a storytelling section. But in terms of what actually happens, that is a Saturday night. Okay, this is what the players have done. What's my favourite bit is when we think about how they react, is how the NPC react. It's not how we want them to. It's stepping back and thinking, okay, how does that character, how does this character, how do these different leaders of different elements in the world, want to react to this news when it reached them straight away? Are they unaware of it? They're still going to carry on their master plan, which is now pointless.
Yeah.
Which causes great drama, and it does leave that section event open for the players writing. I don't think we quite write some days. We see what players have written through their actions, and then we just send some NPCs in, or set some encounters up to react to those things they've written.
If we're lucky, set up for things to happen at a future event.
Yeah, if we're lucky.
So, I mean, yeah, one of my favourite things for when we were doing the Odyssey stuff is once we got into the swing of doing it, is the fact that anything that a player did, or even a plot writer did, could then be broken down to the metaphysical elements of what did they actually do to the metaphysic, how would it react, how would this person know about it, would this person know about it, and then basically rebuild the universe from the foundation, which we had to do on a fairly regular basis.
I think you. Sorry, I think you have the truth of it there. There's a couple of key points that answer this question. How do you tell a good story when you don't know what your players are going to do? One, know the rules of your world.
I think it's really important to know how your world works, because then you're consistent and you're not having to retrofit and make any changes. So then if anything does happen that you need to make changes for, it will still fit and it won't feel like you're gypping the players.
Yeah, players will spot inconsistency at 100 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Secondly, and Helly hit this on the head, don't be precious.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how much you love the plot you've written. If the players drive it into a ditch, set fire to it, and run away giggling, it's served its purpose.
A good example of this was when I did the stuff for Pan, for Odyssey. None of that got seen. One of the things we do is we may do some writing, and because depending what options pick, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you may never get to see, but that doesn't matter because it meant that something else happened that was better.
Yeah.
And thirdly, like Rob says, be consistent to the motives of your NPCs.
Yeah.
What your NPCs want should be outlined and should create a dynamic framework for the game. So what the players do in reaction to those NPCs should generate its own story. Between that, a consistent world, and the willingness to sit up at 2 o'clock in the morning going, fuck, you should be sorted.
And part of that, sorry, Tony.
I just think to expand on that point though, although we may, depending on how we work, because I know that when each of us lead, we may lead in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But to make it clear from that point though, is that we may not necessarily have a plan of what happens on the Sunday of a timetable, but we do have a rough idea that if this happens, then that will be the outcome. If that happens, that will be the outcome. And then we will then timetable that in on the day, but we don't go to an event and we sit down on the Saturday night and decide, oh, well, we've got no idea how to end this. Let's try and write something in the last 5 minutes. We have an idea of what might happen, but we don't know how we may timetable that on the last day itself, perhaps, because it will all depend on the player's action, because we will respond to what it is that they do.
And yeah, part of that is by having actual personalities for your bad guys, as in if you have a big bad who is overseeing the entire plot but you just haven't written them yet, you don't know how they're going to react. So even if the players haven't seen something, it should exist. But on the flip side of this, anything that the players have not seen is not canon yet, which means that the desk side can retcon anything that they have written, because the players have not seen it yet and it doesn't matter. We can change all of the motivations for what is going on at the flip of a switch, because we haven't told anybody what they are yet, so it doesn't really matter. But the important thing is to make that consistent from player side, and to never, ever retcon what a player has just succeeded at.
Which is why it's always really good to nail down backstage how your universe works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think
that's a lot on that. To Jonathan Pan there for killing the collector's plot dead. by opening the Ark of Covenant. Thanks, John.
But,
we have to do quite a lot of rewriting based on the fact you wiped out all the baddies with
also,
one action.
but also for Cat Stark for killing off Darius at the beginning of Odyssey for various people at various points in every system by hitting that big red button where we didn't realise we put it.
Thank you to a whole infinite number of players who have royally fucked our stories that you never got to see or ended the way that we may have necessarily intended, but we all had fun. You had fun, then we had fun. And that's part of why we do it the way we do.
But they're the best bits. And I think Aquarians, just don't get precious and get ready to set fire to everything you've ever written.
Yeah.
Which could be a 3-year plot arc that you have to throw in the bin because someone walks into a ditch and bumps into the wrong person at the wrong time, and it is what it is.
I mean, my favourite for the Odyssey things was rewriting the entire metaphysics because an NPC appeared in the wrong tent.
Event 2.
Yeah. Anyway, should we move on to a new one?
Right.
Yeah, go on.
Having run both large fest events and smaller scale events, what do you think are the strengths of both options, and is there one you think is better?
Is there no comment?
No. Oh wait, no, yeah, you can say no comment because then you'll not say anything. So for a start, I think it's fair to say that I haven't really run any fest games. I've helped out with story at Odyssey for 2 years. So, I mean, I have seen behind the scenes and I've helped out reffing and crewing at various kind of fest-sized games. And I've attended and played a lot of fests and smaller games. What are the differences? What are the benefits of each? So, for me, fest games are a great space for a lot of personal role play. Personal role play between characters. The sort of role play that doesn't involve saving the world. It involves falling in love, making friends, making enemies, family relationships, friendships, all those sort of things. And I think fests are great for that. I think fests are absolutely brilliant for there always being something going on. I have never been in a position at a fest game where there wasn't something I could go and do. Even if I only spoke to each person for like half an hour and then I moved on to someone else, I would have enough people to speak to all weekend. There's always something going on. I think fests are fantastic for that. I love being able to sort of hop from tent to tent, speaking to different people. Also, you can't beat the spectacle of large events and just huge crowds of people. That really adds an atmosphere that it's very hard to recreate in a situation where you don't have those numbers. So on the flip side, smaller events, what do smaller events give you? They give you more access to plot, and they give you more access to, I suppose you'd call it personal plot, but I like to think of it more as the ability to tell the story you want to tell. Partly because you're only competing with 30 to 60 other people to tell a story, to tell your version of the story and what you want to happen. And also because the people running the game only have 30 to 60 people to keep track of. And I know from my experience that smaller games, I can keep track of everybody there. And I can have a tick list and I can keep track of everyone and make sure everyone's doing things, and to tailor plot to people and to really react to what those people do, which I don't think you can replicate on a larger scale because you cannot make personalized anything for over 2,000 people, not with a small team of volunteers over a weekend. Like you cannot create the level of detailed personal plot for everybody at the game. So I think at smaller games, you get more intensity of interaction with the world, I suppose, with the plot that's going on, and you have more chance of interacting with it, and you have more chance of the things that you do being noticed and the world reacting to them. So that's kind of the benefits I see of the two different types. Sorry, Ascot.
I tend to view it as similar to the difference between a tentpole movie and a TV series. You won't have the budget to play with if you're making a TV show that you have if you're making a movie. You won't have the cast of thousands and the high quality production values, although even that's changing now. But in the same way, it's a more flexible medium. I personally prefer smaller events. But yeah, I want a big event budget in a small event, so I'm very difficult to keep happy when it comes to this kind of thing.
I think if we're talking about cost per head, conversely, one thing that I like with doing the smaller events is that you can, if you charge more, then it does mean that each player gets more back, rather than if you're at a large event of like 1,500 people or so, that money doesn't necessarily go to one person as much. So even though you may have a bigger event, they may all see a bit of a thing. So it just depends on how you do the logistics. If you're going to do something for a bigger event, you need to have a bigger spectacle and you need to have more stuff for more people to see. Whereas if you have a more intimate or smaller event, then that money can go to those individuals and that budget can go on smaller stuff that people will go out and physically touch and be involved in directly and be much closer with. So I think it depends on that with your budget. We have never ran a full fest event from the whole experience. We've never floor managed and site managed at a big fest event, like with PD with 2,000 people. We did the story, but we've never done the whole side of that. Whereas, because I am quite a practical, hands-on-y type of person on the day, I enjoy the smaller events because I get to be aware of more things and I can manage the logistics of other things going on at the same time because I'm a bit of a fixer.
So,
although I do not have the energy that Rob definitely has on these things. Rob is a very, very powerful logistical force in prepping up to the event. I think it's different things for what I prefer, whether I prefer a bigger one or a smaller one, because they are, as Ian says, they're two different kinds of things and you will get a different experience. Off what Helly says, you can have this wonderful big party vibe where you get to be involved in a very deep and very colourful world in a well-designed fest game. Like with Empire, the world building I really love. It is a beautiful world to witness and be a spectator in and see it all around you. And you can make your own fun within this wonderful sandbox that they've got there. Whereas conversely with smaller events, I like feeling like a bigger fish in a smaller pond, where I feel that you can have more influence as an individual and things kind of have higher stakes depending on the scenario, because there's fewer people that you're kind of sharing time with and sharing resources with, and you can be closer with the larger group rather than just a small chunk of it.
So I have a problem with the word fest LARP at this point, because the events that we mostly do are kind of 30 to 60 person events, certainly under 100, which you can run in a certain way, which as Helly has described, you can have tick boxes to make sure that everybody is having fun. You basically have one-to-one contact as a ref or as a story runner with every single person on site. And at the far end of the scale, you have something like Empire, where you can't really, the ratio of story to players means that you need a lot of things that are going to mechanically run all of their very own, and not require very much plot involvement. But between those states is a completely different set of things. So I briefly ran God at Empire for the first couple of events, based on the fact that I had experience running God at Odyssey. And Odyssey is a completely different experience to both of those kind of extremes of the thing, because whilst you still have knowledge of all of the things that are going on the site, and you have knowledge of the groups of you have individual groups of people who you can who you can target things at, and who are doing things and what they're doing, and you have individual people within that, and it's just enough within the monkey sphere, the group of 200 people you can care about at any one time, to know roughly where everything is at one point if you are sitting in the middle of it, and that includes floor managing and knowing what site you're up to, and knowing that the toilets are on fire, and all of these kind of things that it's not possible to do at the Fest scale, and that's at the Empire scale, but at the sort of 300 persons scale that we ended up at Odyssey as a stable thing, it is kind of more possible to do that thing on the larger scale. In the gap between the cast of thousands, you have a cast of hundreds, but that's, you know, enough for the day to day, while still possibly even having some of the budget to do some of the big things. So, and smaller events, as has been covered, you get the definite bits of individual attention, but there's always, I actually prefer slightly larger events to the smaller events, because basically within the smaller events you have much more of an external social problem than you do with the slightly larger events. Groups become massively more impactful at small events than they do at larger events, because a group of 10 people could be a third of the player base or a sixth of the player base, and can basically control information on a much larger scale than they can at a larger event. And it actually provides more opportunities for being able to be outside the main stuff but still have your own little game going on, rather than at the Empire thing where you have the large groups who are doing stuff, the even larger groups who are doing even more stuff, and smaller groups getting lost in the shuffle a bit and not really getting any attention at all sometimes. And it's a problem. I also worked in plot for Empire, and I know so I see at all the different aspects where that becomes a problem. So there's definitely, there's more than two kinds. There's lots of different kinds of events that you can scale up and scale down, but the kind of personal attachment and personal splash damage and watching individual people things stops working very well at the kind of 300 to 400 people mark. Stops working at all. So it's all a matter of exactly where on the scale you want to fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a player, it's a very different experience than when you're running the stuff. So I think so what I was talking about before was what I like as a player, but I think when you're running stuff, the thing that I like with the smaller events is that you have more control and more kind of intimacy with everything that's going on. Whereas when you have the larger events, if you're working in a group backstage, you either need to delegate and have a larger team and pass more control onto other people. And you can become a bit detached. So you've got to make sure that you have a very good team and and you trust a lot of the people with you, which is great.
Yeah.
We don't do that at the minute because we are doing this for profit, and we wouldn't have people doing that unless we were paying them. Yeah. So it would be difficult for us to do that at this stage with the sizes that we've got.
Yeah. But I mean, the advantage to also spreading out slightly means that you actually need to pay more attention to how you do things. You need slightly better information flow and slightly better project management, which actually makes a lot of things easier in terms of making sure that everyone has their ducks in a row.
Yeah, I think in our case, though, one of the reasons why we're not looking at large fests at the moment is because if we were going to have people to do that, we've kind of decided that we would pay people. So until we could afford to do that, we won't do that yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, the larger point, and I don't know how well known this is at the moment, but the intention with Alba is to not only do the small individual nation events, but eventually to do the larger Alba-wide events at a kind of larger scale. And we're still kind of working up to that. One day we'll run a second Alba event. I'm hoping it will be next year at this point. But eventually, I would definitely like us to be on the scale of running both of the different options, and not the Empire scale things, because, as I say, nothing that we're doing at this point runs to that scale, and you have to completely rewrite everything, how we do LARP, how we approach it in order to do it.
it's a very difficult job, and some of it is a lot. People don't get enough credit for the work that they volunteer out to do these things.
I mean,
and, you know,
that is the next question. So, are there other LARP runners who inspire you?
Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm super uncomfortable with answering this type of question, not necessarily in a LARP context, but in a life context, because it's a part of culture that I am not comfortable with, the kind of like the mutual backslapping.
The LARP theory is pervasive and horrible.
But it's a thing I find uncomfortable to do the whole kind of like, I'm going to shout out to all of these people, mostly because I just kind of like, I don't think like that on a daily basis. But having said that, there are LARP runners who have taught me some really important lessons. And I'm going to talk about some people that most of you have probably never heard of. And I'm going to explain why they're important people. So I started LARP at Treasure Trap, at Durham University Treasure Trap, and I learnt a lot of my early lessons by writing with teams of people at Treasure Trap. They had a very kind of intensive system of always training up new people. And I was very lucky that my best friend was Jay Copley Mills, who writes a lot of LARP. I think he's currently writing for DUD sometimes, and certainly runs player events and stuff for them. And in the past has run a lot of Treasure Trap stuff and has helped run other events, I'm sure, but they've gone from my mind. He was an avid writer back in the days when I mostly played and wasn't really interested in writing or reffing. And he taught me a lot of lessons, and I suppose in a way we kind of learned together some stuff, but mostly he taught me was stuff around how to approach LARP and how to put into practice things that will stop problems happening down the line. And this was a system that we learned from a guy that we called Righty, Simon Wright, who was a long-standing member of Treasure Trap, who was a very wise individual and a very good sword fighter as well. He's mostly known for that, but the thing that I remember him for is his writing and a lot of the rules, as we used to call them, the rules for how to write. And it was things like, if you write an NPC, you do not play that NPC. And that was around the idea that you avoid the problems of becoming too attached and becoming on the side of the NPC rather than telling a story from a neutral position, because actually you're the storyteller or the referee. It's other things like if you write a plot briefing or a plot document for an arcing plot that's going to run over several weeks, you have to A, write it the fuck down, and B, write it down in such a way that if you disappeared off the face of the earth tomorrow, somebody else can pick it up and run it. And that was an important lesson for me. And another one that sort of the rules was that you don't always do the same downtime. So that was every character could submit a downtime in Treasure Trap, and we tried to rotate whose downtimes you answered so that you didn't start favoring specific players. And it was all things that I learned at a very young age to help stop problems that they had dealt with in the past and had come up with these methods. So I have a lot of respect for Simon Wright, a lot of respect for Jay, best friend, and all of that. Sean Patterson, who taught me one of the most important lessons about running LARPs, and that was, if you are the head ref, you have to be prepared to do the really crap jobs, and that you in fact should be doing the crap jobs. And the go-to example was, if you want an NPC who has to lay in the mud and be a corpse for half an hour and it's cold and raining, the head ref does it, not a minion, not a member of crew, not someone who's there for a good time. You do it, because if you've written that, you should be willing to play it. So there's a bunch of people who, very few people I think will know who I'm talking about, but those people are great, and I have a lot of respect for them.
Okay. Ian?
So I'm going to continue the theme of a bunch of names you've never heard of. I'm going to give you 3, and 2 of them are very much in my mind because I'm working with them again for the first time in 15 years. But the first one I'm going to give you might be known to some people. It's a bit of a name from the past. A chap called Tony Mitten, who was a bit of a name in the UK freeform scene in the late 80s and early 90s. Tony Mitten wrote the first games I would identify as LARP that I ever played in. Games Fair 89 in Reading and Gen Con 91 at Camber Sands. Vampire the Masquerade freeform games, may God have mercy on my soul.
Watch it.
And he kind of opened my mind to the idea that you could play out a tabletop role-playing game meeting setup in a live scenario at a convention. This was complete madness to me, and to a large degree is pretty much responsible for everything that I did for the next 10 years in that field. The other 2 people I want to flag up. I suspect most of you know Cy Manby. Cy inspires me because his energy is boundless and his enthusiasm is endless, and it doesn't matter how much of a cul-de-sac you've written yourself into or how you've boxed yourself in. He will not only find a way out of it for you, but he'll do it, and he'll grin, and he'll make you grin too. And sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, you really need that. He is fantastic at taking whatever you have written, giving it a quarter turn, and then giving it back to you and saying, it is now 150% more awful than it was when you gave it to me.
And
sometimes you really need that. The last person I'm going to cite is a very, very old friend by the name of Paul Snow, who is not a LARPer. Indeed, he would be quite insulted to be described as such. But he taught me the most important lesson I ever learned about writing, which is slaughter your babies. The more important something is to you, the more important it is that you either give it to someone else or break it.
Yep.
Because if it becomes too precious to you that it starts to warp your writing,
you don't want what we call Dennis Waterman syndrome, where you write the theme tune and sing the theme tune and it becomes the most important part. It's very important that you don't drown out the other important things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is very, very good at puncturing my pomposity when it looks like I'm heading that way.
I have to get some tips from it.
It doesn't always work, trust me.
So I think mine, probably Andy and Pam Bridgewater and Andy Thomas. Not many people who are watching this probably ever played Shadow Wars. I was still playing LT with everyone in the group when they first started doing it. I missed up the first chunk of it. I played one, got really into it, and then it was my first opportunity for writing something, and it was that group of people who just said, look, if you want to write some stuff, take part in the game and write it, and we'll go through it with you, and we'll spend the time with you. And they spent a lot of time helping me develop the confidence to do my own thing. And then when I did do my own thing, we're supportive. The guys lent us props when we first started off with Forsaken. The guys always offered help with really little things, but also came to crew. So yeah, they're the reason that you get really interesting things that I write now. So blame Andy, Pam, and Andy. The other persons, I think it's one thing people don't think about when they say LARP writers or designers is it's not just those people. There's a lot of other people involved. So people I find really inspiring on that front is Emma Woods, who I'm not sure what new role is called at Empire, but she's in charge of a bunch of stuff. But was head reffing for a while.
Conduct, I think, is her current.
Yeah, I don't know if she's still doing the reffing stuff, but it's someone who has fought really hard to get where she is. She's fought a lot of bullshit over the years. A lot of mud's been flung at her. People have been really rude, horrible. But she's never let that get her down. She's always pushed through it for selfish reasons to try and make it better. And I find that really, and it is someone that really inspires me in terms of being a writer and a designer, is that sometimes you get it wrong, sometimes some people won't like it, but if you think you're doing the right thing and it is the right thing to do, then keep pushing through, and eventually people will recognize that, and you can be a big force for change. So yeah, thanks to Emma Woods is another person.
So I'm going to name Jesse Holder, who is the person who got me into crewing Odyssey. Basically by coming up to me after Odyssey 2 and saying, I think we need somebody like you to stop the ref team from killing the story team, and vice versa. But also has helped me understand an awful lot of where the problems that I don't see in LARP events are, and how to use my weight to push them in different directions. But also people like Emma and Shek, who have been running very, very accessible LARP events recently, and have been sort of providing new mechanics for the teams to use to help people who don't usually get enough focus in events, which we're bringing some bits on for things that we're doing as well.
For me, I've got 4 off the top of my head. One of which may be a bit of an unsung hero, I guess, to some degree, but it's actually Ali Pennington. I really appreciate the amount of logistical work that she does. Now, I've not seen her stuff recently, but when we did work around each other, I always loved the way that she made the trains run on time, and the way that she worked with people to make sure that the trains ran on time. There was no sense of ego. There was all this clever planning that had been done thousands of years in advance. And if anything went wrong on the day, just there's your answer. This is what we can do to fix it. Very much a can-do attitude. And again, a lot of work goes into the stuff that some people may not be aware of. And if that person doesn't do their job, sorry, let me rephrase that. If the person does their job well, you will never know.
Yeah.
Because that's the point of doing that sort of work, and seeing that there is more to running an event than turning up on the day with a cup of coffee in your hands and seeing that, you know, it's all sort of done magically in front of you. It's really important, and it doesn't get enough credit. So I really like that sort of stuff. I tend to more floor manage on a day rather than the stuff in advance, so I don't know what she does in advance, but I know that it's all there, so the job's being done, and I really like that. Another organisation that I like is I really like Crooked House stuff. The one that we went to help crew at for All for One. Beautiful location, fabulous food, fantastic costumes. All the players seemed to have a ball. It was so immersive. It was so beautiful. I really like their attention to detail on the stuff that they do. When I go to an event and when I help run an event, I really enjoy the whole kind of like 5 senses experience. And it looked beautiful. It sounded perfect. The food was good. So all those senses were being taken care of. And that's something that I like to do in events. And I see that they do stuff, and they're kind of like something that I kind of like to take inspiration from. Another side that I like to take inspiration from as well is a theatre company called Punch Drunk. When you go to their events, the set design that they have is the best set design that I've ever seen at any stage event in my life. You can literally walk around the locations and it is like you are actually at those places. And when I try and run an event or set something up, I want it to feel as immersive, or anything just like even half as immersive as what they do. Their level of immersion is incredible. And the final thing that I would say is that with lots of experience, many people have inspired me. either because I see them do a thing and I want to learn from their mistakes. I learn from my own mistakes. I learn from other people's mistakes as well. But I think a positive inspiration that I get is actually from you guys. I know it's very masturbatory, but for example, the first event that I went to
Horror.
was well, for us it was like a third or fourth date, wasn't it? I went to this LARP event to see what it is that you crazy kids did, and it was actually your last demo event, and I was absolutely taken aback by how kind of crazy and how much fun that it was and what this LARP thing was. Then I met Helly and Rob, and some of the events that they did and the way that they think is very similar to the way that we think about running events. Again, I have huge respect for Rob's logistics in setting up to an event. There's so many things that, again, as I was saying with Ali P, there's so much work that goes into running an event, and you think about stuff that hadn't even entered my mind. So it's good to kind of know these things. And I really love the world building that Helly does, and also how to make it so kind of inclusive. And again, with Aquarian, who does amazing things with computers and how to make data mean stuff that we can do something with in a very esoteric way that shows us how we are performing and what we need to do to make stuff work to actually kind of mechanize players' experience, and that we can monitor how people are enjoying stuff and how they're engaged and how we can adapt and how that influences the games that we make, which is such a cool thing that I didn't think that would be possible to do. And it's this other wonderful, delicious thing that we are adding to our stuff. And I just find, I don't even understand it, and I'm just impressed and amazed by it. It just makes us feel good.
I just want to add to that in terms of our blowing our own trumpet on that front. The one thing I love about working with you guys and that inspiration that we do inspire each other, and even though we've all got kind of our niche that works really well for us, everyone can then has a little bit of the other niche. Yeah. So I think Alba was the first time we were all together properly, and it was a first event. First events are first events. Everyone who's run a first event with a campaign plan, those are the first events.
The important thing is that nobody died.
Anyone who's run a first event knows we don't need to finish that sentence because that's what first events do.
Yeah. But it's a thing of we all bring our niche thing, but at the same time, it's when we talk about story or plot, everyone's involved.
Yeah,
and I think that's a key to where I see our success of working well together and gelling well together is I do a lot of logisticsy, boring stuff as well as I do a lot of writing stuff. But then Aquarian, there's a lot of the kind of systems, like the system design. Okay, how is this going to work together? How do we log that? But at the same time, Aquarian's also thinking about the stories and writing stories with that. Ian's writing giant briefs. Helly's writing really amazing character briefs. Tony's just like, I've got this idea to make this thing work. In your head, like, that's not how fabric works or a wig or makeup. And then you see something, you go, I don't know how you did that in like 5 seconds flat. But at the same time, there's also thinking about the story and the plot because we're all on the same wavelength of how stories work.
Yeah,
everyone's feeding in. You haven't just got I'm the costume person, I'm the logistics person. You're a costume person, a logistics person, an IT person. But you're also part of the writing team. So when everything is getting written on the plot, everything's been thought about. It mashes well together. Nothing sits outside of the inner circle of the workings of the game.
Yeah,
and that's a key to success. There's no separate.
When the ball comes down from the sky, whoever's under it catches it. It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, one of the things we discussed when we were founding Carcosa Dreams in 2019, which seems like a very long time ago at this point. One of the things that came up was dismissing this auteur theory of LARP design. The idea that any one of us is responsible for any of the LARPs that we produce. I mean, we lead on different things. But anything official that comes out of us is by Carcosa Dreams. It is not by any one individual person. It is a collective credit, and it is also a collective responsibility, which is also why we try to do things like complaints and things as Carcosa Dreams, which loses some of the personality, but does mean that you can't say. One of the things is when you have somebody coming into your tent and saying, I think this is a plot writer problem, and they're right, because there is nobody else on the team who could possibly answer that question except that individual person, and that's bad, because it means that that person can't do anything else ever again. And so part of what we wanted to do was to make sure that that everybody knows what's going on in the holistic sense, so that the answer to this question in any future time is going to be, I admire Carcosa Dreams as a thing, rather than being able to say this individual person within the hydra of Carcosa Dreams is the one true savior of LARP, because we're not.
Absolutely, and I think I may have let us wander off into a different direction there, because I didn't want to infer that this was kind of how we work.
No,
this was just the things that I have seen about a bunch of people that have inspired me, and one of the reasons why, from my point of view, is I want to work with you guys, is because that is why I want to work with you guys, because you are really good at those things, and that's what I've seen that's inspired me in that way.
Okay,
Give us another awkward question, Aquarian.
I think that's another. That's enough back patting for one time. I think I'm going to swap these two around because this is going to be more fun. How do you decide what mechanics to use in each system you run? What do you think a good set of mechanics should achieve?
Ooh.
Oh.
I'm joking. No, I'm not joking. Okay. How do you do set mechanics? It's really hard because it's how everything needs to work together. So for me, you write a core design feature of your game. You write a very core thing, which is, this is what our game is about, and it's only got to be a paragraph long ever. If it's 3 sides of A4, you're in big trouble already. What is the core theme of your game? What are the core things you want players to take away from it? And it's write mechanics which support that, and it's that simple. There's no big mystery of numbers. Sometimes there's a bit more. There's hit points, sometimes there's hit points, and it's thinking about your core concept first, and do those mechanics support those core concepts and that play style happening, and that's it. And you, no more, no less. Are you adding in something because someone else does it? Then don't do it. Throw everything out the bin. Start from scratch every time. Trying to take what you've done before and just port that in with a different system on, because you'll find there's issues on it. I think that's the crux of it, really.
It's working out what you don't need. I mean, one of the things that went in and out of Alba when we started was, how are we going to do armor? Until we realized that there's no real reason to do armor. And to change hit point management in a completely different way, and that makes costume so much more of an interesting thing if you don't have to put big thick leather boots on top of it, and that falls back on a lot of the other things. Basically, as few mechanics as you can possibly get away with, but no less than that.
That's kind of, so I'm a minimalist. I like to be a minimalist for aesthetic reasons, haha. But also, my joke is that I'm a minimalist because I'm lazy and I like to do the least possible. But actually, I'm a great believer that you don't put something in unless you need it, and that it backs up whatever the theme of the game is. So for me, when I start writing, I come up with this core theme. I come up with a core concept, and then everything that I do, I look back to that. I write it in big, like, foot-high letters on the wall, and every time I think of something to do with that game, I check the wall to see what the theme of the game is and make sure that the thing I'm doing in some way backs that up, in some way meshes with that. And I think one of the things that you get with experience and with running lots of games is that you get to that marvelous place where you go, do we really need X? And I think armor rules is a good example of this. Do we need armor rules? What will happen if we don't have armor rules? and you can explore that. And then it's one of those things that once you've thrown one thing out, you get a bit throw happy and you start stripping everything right back. And when nothing is required, suddenly everything is a design decision. And that for me is where I like to be. I like to be in a space where everything that's there has had to fight its corner, has had to prove its worth in order to be in the game. And it has to prove that within the bounds of being in theme and being part of the game. I don't include things as reactions. I don't include things because we always do it that way. I hate all of that sort of stuff. And I think that it creates a much more interesting situation that way.
And it's why the systems between the games that we've got aren't in any way similar, because different things require different games. I mean, there are similarities because the same people designed them, and those design aesthetics are going to stay. But it's also that it's a scale thing as well, because there are things that you can non-mechanicize at a small player event that simply aren't going to work when you have 300 people around, and aren't going to work once you can't trust everybody on the field not to be an arsehole all of the time.
There you have it. There you have it. There, at the moment, I think we are running 3 variations on systems. We've got the Alba setup, which is quite festy and in some ways a little bit traditional in terms of its design. And then you've got the system that we use for the for games like Forsaken and T67, and that's been adapted for use with Sisyphus and Tabula Rasa, which is largely, once you've taken a few wrinkles out, the same system, which is not at all like anything that most people tend to see, because you can trust your player base when it's small, and it's a question of first principles. Why do you include a rule? And if you do not have a good answer for why you are including a rule, do not include that rule.
Yeah. And
I think it can be very tempting to start with, and understandably so, to see what other people are doing when you're new and then just copy paste, because you know that works. But to echo what everyone else is saying, know what your aims are and know what your objectives are. And going on Aquarian's point, then do just enough for that and no more, because you want to give people their freedom whilst making sure that no one's cheating, and that everyone is being fair, and that there is some sort of risk and reward. But it's got to further the game, so you will always go to your aims. Now, when we've done stuff, for example, like some of our games that are more narrative and experience driven, they haven't been that mechanized, and the rules have been fairly simple and loose, as long as no one is cheating, and that's all fine.
Yep.
But there are other games that you may want to do where there's a huge amount of kind of Byzantine mechanized points, because that may be fun for the certain kind of game that you're doing. And you may want to put that in because that may actually be someone's game at an event that you're running. So you've got to know what it is that you want to do and then tailor that accordingly. There isn't a one-size-fits-all process other than the logistics of knowing what you want and then finding the most elegant solution to achieving that, I think.
So there was... sorry, just one extra point on that. So one of the other things is not only no more, but also no less. There was a mistake we made early in, again, an Odyssey example, whereby we did not have a system in place for tracking some things because we didn't believe that they were going to need to be tracked between events. And then we realized that actually, yes, this was going to need to be a thing in order for the game to have any sense of state.
Yes.
And so we needed to put some more mechanizations in order to make that a thing that worked.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, it is to make sure you have the elegant system that is the elegant system that fits.
Yes, and to go on that point, stuff that we've done as well, for example, with Alba, is you then playtest.
Yeah.
So know what you want, make your mechanics, and then try it out and see if it'll fit. and then you'll make changes accordingly. Don't wait and think it'll all work out in the night, because we learn from our mistakes in that way. If you've got your solution in your mechanics, then play test it before you run the event, because it is possible that it may go a different way to what you think.
Also admit you might have to change your mechanics. Sorry, Rob, I interrupted you when I spoke.
So the thing I think about, I think I spoke for it a lot, from what you want your story to how your story to work. It's not just that; it's also who do you want to come along? Who is your market? Some people love number crunching. The thing to remember is you can't please everyone. You can't if people are resource focused, gathering power type games. If it's a one-off narrative space horror, if you try and merge some this kind of low end mechanics with a high end numbers situation, if you start trying to mash them together, it's going to be a nightmare for you. It won't quite work. And also think about what your other aims are. So part of your core concept is how affordable do you want your game to be? It's a big thing to think about. With Armour, with Alba, one of the reasons we made a decision in the end, one of the factors in the end was actually, if we remove Armour, it makes the game a lot more accessible. It means that actually someone can turn up who has a drastically different real world salary to someone else, and they could be equal in the game world based on the fact that they put some face makeup on, which we can even provide for them at the in the monster room. And it is thinking about those things on top of your story. Is how do people pick that up? How can people access that game through that? Which then obviously includes your accessibility. How accessible is your game? Which areas are physically accessible, which aren't? And being honest with yourself and honest with the people who, when you put it out there, is this is what we can do, this is what we've done, and giving people that space to make their own decisions.
So an important point for me about, so if we can circle back to what should a good set of mechanics achieve, and the answer for me for that is that there are many things that mechanics can achieve, but for me the things that I want them to achieve are that they promote the style of play that I'm aiming for, that they reward players for playing in the style of game that I want them to play. So if it's, for example, a game about storytelling, then I would expect the mechanics to in some way support the need to tell stories. If the game is about hitting someone with a sword as fast as possible, then I would expect the mechanics to reward you for being faster with a sword. And the converse of that is that I don't like mechanics to punish people. I prefer carrot to stick for people in their hobby time. People come to us because they want to eat carrots, not because they want us to hit them with sticks. That's a very different hobby that I'm not involved with.
You can follow our other website at www.getsticks by AnthonyandRob.com.
Yeah. But the other thing I like in my mechanics, I think a good set of mechanics should achieve is promoting the themes of your game. So if your game is, for example, I think with Forsaken, one of the themes of the game is that everybody is an individual, and what you bring to your group is an individual thing. And I was very certain from a very early stage in the writing of the mechanics that I wanted people to have unique skills. And Rob said to me, well, that's insane. And I said, yeah, and have you met me? And, it is a bit of a nightmare to try and keep track of a whole set of unique abilities and skills, and trying to remember what people can do and what they are likely to do in an interaction with a plot that you've written. But at the same time, it is so worth it for every time someone dies at the game, some character dies, and that mechanic or that ability or what they brought to the group dies with them.
Yeah.
And in a very real way, that is a complete loss for the team, for the people who are playing the game. And it also means that you don't end up with the perfect D&D group, which is a thing that often happens in a more traditional setting, especially things like tabletop, where you have 5 characters and they cover all the possible needs and they don't need anyone else. And that was a thing that I absolutely wanted to avoid with Forsaken. In other games, sure, if it's a game where we want to reward people for getting into a team of 5, then I would probably write a set of mechanics that allows a group of 5 people to cover all their bases. I think that's, for me, the important thing that mechanics need to achieve, is that they reward players for playing in the style that you want them to play in. And I'm not passing any judgment on play style there, because I like all sorts of different games. And that it backs up the themes of the role play as well for your game.
And it's not just what we like, because I mean, so far we have not done things with a lot of a heavy PvP element, despite that being one of the things that Helly really likes in a LARP, because it just hasn't been appropriate for any of the things that we've done.
Yes. Giant sprawling downtimes, lots of numbers, PvP. These are all things I love, but I don't necessarily run that because I'm not sure that I love running it.
Yeah.
But also because those aren't appropriate for the styles of games that we have so far written.
So
I mean, we might bring you resource collecting PvP the LARP, but I'm not sure that's close to top of the list.
That'll come up as a separate question, don't we? Okay. In a situation where all the players and crew know what they are signing up for and have consented, do you think there are certain topics and themes that should just never be role-played?
We may have different answers to this, and that's cool.
Anthony, do you want to go first?
Okay. In my opinion, academically, I think that there is no reason why nothing could be role played. It would just depend on how it's done and the logistics of it. Whether I would want to run that myself may be a different question. But I've been aware of other events that have run, and initially when I first heard them, it gave me a very deep visceral reaction. There was one called, was it Whole Lot of Lovin'?
A Whole Lot of Lovin'.
Whole Lot of Lovin'. And when I heard about it, it was explained to me that it was a bunch of people in the 80s playing queer people who would then have sex with each other and then role play going away and meeting up and going away and meeting up and then people dying. As a gay man who has buried several friends that died either of HIV or died committing suicide in relation to catching HIV or the situations that they caught them, when I first heard about it, I had a very visceral, like, why would anybody want to roleplay this? This just feels like misery tourism. This is making light of something that I have first-hand experience of not being a fun thing for people to do. But then when I spoke to some other people about it, I can see that there was some merit to it. And in comparison, when Helly came up with the idea for the quota, there is some role-playing experiences which may not necessarily be pleasant or enjoyable, and they're kind of what we may call type 2 fun, and you're enjoying having a horrible time. But this was kind of something that was more deeper and profound than that. I thought it was a wonderful experience, to almost an empathy exercise where you can feel what it's like being in these horrible, difficult, triggering situations. You will have to monitor and you will have to police those to the ground.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes roleplay can be a very useful tool, not just for entertainment, not even just for art, but for empathy and understanding. But I think it will depend on how it's run, what the topics are, and if everyone is consenting and aware of that. So for me, it's very difficult. I don't think you could just say absolutely no. You have to understand and treat it as a case-by-case basis.
So I strongly think that there aren't any things which, with the duty, with the minimum, with the duty of care, that would not be able to be done. I mean, I'm aware of various different things in the, especially in the Nordic LARP system, where they use them to explore some dark and terrible topics, including a lot of loving, and including stuff like the quota, which for people who have been involved in the immigration system in this country in any way, shape, or form will find traumatic. I mean, I noped out of attending the quota because my mental health was not up to it in the event. And the consent thing is, if everybody has consented, that's fine. But there are several people I know who would absolutely consent to being in that environment, who I would negatively consent to being in the same environment with on that topic. So there are a certain amount of topics that I think you would have to do it as a definite, you trust everybody in the room with this before you go into the room. But most of them, to be honest, fall alongside the things of, yes, I think this should be possible to do. I think anybody should be allowed to do it. I think it will be a good thing to exist in the world. No, I'm not going to.
So, are you done?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is a really difficult question, and okay, how am I going to explain this? Okay, so I don't think it's as easy as saying that everyone's consented. First of all, I'd like to point out that there are situations where it is not possible for everyone to consent, and I'm thinking specifically here of children who, for certain things, are not old enough to consent, and therefore topics around that and the involvement of children in certain activities that they are not able to consent to should not be explored in LARP with children. I'm not sure that I'd want to explore them with not children, but there we go. That's personal preference. The other thing that I want to caveat onto this question, which I think is a very important thing, and I think it's the thing that makes me really jumpy around certain topics, is that consent isn't a one tick box. Consent is an ongoing state. You can consent to something and then you can withdraw your consent. Or I've read a few examples of people who have consented to topics, have attended an event knowing that there are certain topics, but then when they've been faced with it, have actually found that they couldn't deal with it. And I think that that's very important, that we acknowledge that that's a situation that can occur. I remember many moons ago, and this will date this, I read it on a forum, and I think it might have even been Paga, where an American woman gave a description of what happened to her in a fully consenting situation that caused her great trauma, because she went into a domestic violence style situation in character that she fully consented to, and she completely trusted everyone involved. And then at the moment that the person who was mistreating her walked up to her and said in her ear, "Kneel," and she completely fell apart. She dropped to her knees and she froze, and she had flashbacks, and it caused her huge trauma that she could have in no way predicted would happen, but it did happen. And I often think about that, and I think about whether the potential of causing somebody to relive trauma is worth it. And I know for a lot of people, that's not necessarily going to happen, and a lot of people go into things knowing, but in that moment, there is always that chance that something is going to hit you in a way that you didn't expect. And it's happened to me. I've had situations in LARP where I've had to just go, no, actually, I can't deal with this, and just walk away. And I've then had to go through dealing with that, often in a situation where I'm in a field and I can't get away from the field. And so I get very edgy, very kind of like concerned about some topics, not because I don't believe that they should be explored, but because I'm not sure that the answer is as simple as saying everyone here has consented to this, everyone knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because until it happens, for some people, they won't know. And you have to, I think that we need a lot of consideration for the idea that you don't give consent by signing a piece of paper. Consent is something that you are continually giving, and at any point you can stop.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me that's very important, and I have to kind of wrestle with the idea of whether causing someone real personal psychological damage is worth it for the experience, the fun that we potentially have. I find that difficult to weigh up. So are there things that aren't possible which we shouldn't ever explore? I don't know, but I'm really jumpy about it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we've had, it is unfortunately something that comes up frequently because you cannot in any way predict what triggers people in the field will have, simply because they themselves don't know that they'll be able to spot the trigger coming in advance, that their characters will be in a place to spot it before they are. And you always, when you're running a roleplay experience of any kind, run the risk of tripping over something that a player is unable to deal with in the moment. And the solution to that problem is not to hide from everything that might avoid people, but to trust players to know what their limits are and to provide support and places where they can go and ways to recover from that if they accidentally find themselves in something that they weren't able to predict. There aren't any ways to keep in the same. So LARP is a full contact sport. As far as any insurance thing for it is concerned, if you go into a LARP fight, then there is always the possibility that you are going to get hit by a LARP weapon in a way that you did not want to, and there is always also the place where your psyche might be hit in a place where you did not want it to be hit, and those are similar enough for the purposes of this of what I'm saying now, that we can't protect everybody. We can't put everybody in Zorb balls so that they can't physically hurt anybody. We can't put everybody in emotional Zorb balls so they can't hurt everybody. We can only provide the best information we can to let people make their own decisions. And if they make a decision that ends up having a negative effect on them, giving them the space they need to work that out without mechanical deficit.
I think the only thing I'd add to that would be part of my real world job is risk assessing, and there's also that mental well-being risk assessment and gathering information. So we don't do it every event we do, but when we know we're going to run personalized encounters, so Forsaken, 257, one thing we often put in the booking pack is give us a list of themes which you don't want to go anywhere near.
Yeah.
Because that way, if something is going to come up in the game, we can contact you and say, actually, maybe you should come on to this event. Or we can look at it and go, actually, do we need that in? Yes, we need that in, then we'll take it out. One thing that came up during the quota was a lot of feedback from everyone who booked was that they wanted to explore more harder real world themes such as racism, homophobia, things like that as part of the game. So one thing we did there was we made it a personal. It was a private. You could do it in private spaces, away from a crowd. So someone you couldn't do it in the kitchen, for example, where someone's having a cup of tea, and then you start being horrible to someone in a specific way. And there's things like that you can do to mitigate it. And I think you've kind of touched on it. Is the safety of what happens if it goes wrong? We've made mistakes in the past. Everyone's made mistakes, but it's learning from as you go forward, as we carry on as LARP organisers, is recognising these psychological issues. Do you need this theme in your game? Is one of them, which goes back to an earlier question of how you write your game. Actually, do you know what? We're going to write out racism in this game because it doesn't need it. It's got dark themes already. that's not an in-character or out-of-character theme. End of story.
And just because it's not a theme in the game does not mean that it doesn't exist. I mean, I think one of the problems that some games go for is that they say that, for example, this is a genderless society, and it gives you no tools with which to deal with people who are treating it as a genderless society, because you can't go up to somebody and say, well, you wouldn't have said that because da 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 da, because that's an OC conversation for a different time. But it's making sure that you have the tools to deal with people ignoring the brief whilst not engaging with that aspect of culture.
Yeah, I think there's something from Nordic LARP which I picked up and we put into T67 was the OC space where during the game you can go in and actually discuss your next moves with someone.
Yeah,
and it's not something I've seen in other places really. And some people have suggested in the past, check in with people. Okay, but is it better to have a space where everyone's out of character? You can go in, and we put rather than have it being off the game area, we actually placed it right in the middle. So right in the middle of the game area, behind a closed door, was this room which had tea, coffee, a few snacks and bits and pieces where people could go. Because the game dealt with some pretty hardcore themes, people could go into there, have the conversation of how they want to proceed, walk back out and do it. And I think thinking more, if you are going with harder themes, which could have those impacts, is have you got those places? And I think Ellie said it's a continuous thing of, are you okay with this? Does your game have a break mechanic? Again, something we don't have in UK games, which we have imported now in all of our games, which is here's a signal for me leaving because I'm not comfortable.
And there's the things from Check and Emma's game, which was I'm going to check the windows, meaning I need to take an OC break, which we imported into Diaspora directly, along with the concept of the decompression chamber, which is just an out of character space within the gameplay space that you can just go into for any reason to deal with whatever is going on, or just to take a break from role playing for a couple of minutes. And when you're dealing with heavy themes like that, I think that's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian, you keep trying to say something.
So the short answer to this is no, there are no themes that should never be role played. The slightly more nuanced answer to it is, as Rob and Helly and Aquarian and Tony have all picked up on, that this is a risk assessment, and there comes a point where the ability to assure the safety of players in a game that is handling topics or themes that are well beyond the normal exceeds the skill set of your average or even exceptional LARP organizer. I am not in the business of running the Stanford prison experiment, and I'm not Stanley Milgram. And frankly, I'm not interested in being either of those people. Can LARPs be run that explore those kinds of themes or explore edgy themes? Yes. I would want, before remotely considering touching something like that with a 25-foot barge pole, to see an awful lot of safety, risk assessment, security, psychological presence on the team that is well beyond the ability of most UK LARP to provide. As ever with these things, this is a risk assessment that each player must make for themselves. But I am not in the business of exploring some of these topics or some of these places. If other people want to do it and can do so safely, then they should fill their boots.
So I would also, just one point directly on that, which is that a lot of LARP, now that the mental health first aid courses are generally available, and I'm registered, I've got a mental health first aider certificate somewhere. There is the temptation to say, okay, yes, we can do this because we have a mental health first aider on site. And that's better. But also, if your mental health first aider is a crew volunteer and you are suddenly putting a huge fuck ton of your event's resolution mechanics on top of them as a thing that they're going to have to deal. They're going to need an outlet of expression as well. And also, you are asking far too much for volunteer at that point. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about not wanting to put huge amounts of administrative and mental burden on somebody who is not getting enough out of being here for that to be worth it.
Yeah, I think there, as you said, there's a difference between a first aider and a surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And same with mental first aiders, they are not necessarily equipped to deal with mental issues and people having certain kinds of mental issues at an event.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about there are ways to mechanize things. Another thing that we do, which we've not mentioned yet as well, is that sometimes it's not just a case of if the player is consenting or not. Sometimes we will also make sure that the NPCs are consenting. But even if the players are consenting, we may see that they're actually not dealing with it as well as maybe they think they are, and we will call the scene short and we will manage that. We have done that in the past, we will do it again. So there are many different mechanics that we will put in place to try and mitigate some of these things in some of the more edgy scenes, or even if we consider it not to be an edgy scene, but someone isn't handling it as well as perhaps they might have thought they were.
Yeah.
However, going back to kind of Helly's point before, is we can manage a thing and we can run it and we can put checks in place. Anyone can put these checks in place. We could get the finest psychologists and social workers on site if money was no object and run all these things. But also, would we want to? Could we? Yes, it is possible. Would we want to? Could we? No. We might be able to do certain things, but again, there is so many different situations and mitigation things in place. Because as you said, you will never know how things work out until it actually happens on the day.
It is.
I've actually thought of something that a theme that I don't think anyone should ever explore. And this is slightly jokey. I apologise, but I'm not actually interested in exploring the theme of we as game runners literally murdering players.
Yeah.
Because I think ABH and murder and cannibalism are actually against the law if you do them for real. So I don't think that's anything that we'll be exploring anytime soon. And I certainly hope that no game runners whose events I might attend would be interested in exploring those themes.
Ian, that's your recipe book in the
But yeah,
bin.
there's a lot of things we could do, but we're doing a lot of things, and I don't think we need to do things that aren't fun.
Yeah. I think my final point on that is if you are going to events where they're advertising pretty hard themes that you know are going to be psychologically hard, ask the games team who's running it and what experience they have. And that's the key to this kind of thing is we might not be, I think Tony said it, we're not specialist psychologists, but if we were running something that we required that, we'd go and speak to someone at a minimum, I'd get their advice. And their advice, and from a specialist, their advice might be, don't do it.
Don't do that.
And it was the same with the quota. The quota, the idea of playing refugees was a really hard theme. And we contacted several organisations, and the one who got back to us and asked us to come in and see them was the Refugee Council.
Mm-hmm.
Rob and Charlie Ashby went and literally proposed running this LARP to a bunch of refugees.
It was they had a lot of advocacy groups. And we got feedback. We asked what they thought about it, and they said actually, then they went away, and they didn't give us an answer straight away. They actually went and spoke to people in the organisation whose speciality is the subject, and they came back and said, actually, we think it'd be a good thing. If they'd have come back and said that was a bad thing, you shouldn't do it, we would have put it in the bin and gone, God, we're awful people. Why did we think of that in the first place? Amazingly, they came back and said, actually, we can see you've gone through this very well. You've sought advice. Some of you've got experience working with refugees.
I think the thing that I found
that's a cool idea, I think.
I think the thing I found most interesting about that particular instance, it came up a few times, like we got a bit of sort of kickback from people saying like it's not okay to play with other people's life experience. And the thing that was interesting and the thing that bolstered me through all of that sort of criticism was the fact that the Refugee Council came back to us and said that actually a lot of the people they'd spoken to had a really positive reaction to it, because they wanted to see stories like theirs told, and they wanted people to be brave enough to tell those stories rather than simply to ignore them or shy away from them because, oh well, it's not my job to tell those stories. And they were actually very positive about it, and I was genuinely surprised, because I was well prepared for them to come back saying, no, how dare you, go away, never speak to us again, don't do this thing. So that's also kind of like a point that I think sometimes kind of telling difficult stories, it's very easy to say you shouldn't do this thing because you don't know anything about it or it's not about you. And yeah, you know what, 99% of the time, fair enough. You know, there are certain stories that I shouldn't be telling because they aren't mine to tell. But also, there are stories that if the people whose life experience it is are, you know, interested in you telling those stories, or glad that somebody would take this dreadful kind of like burden that they have to carry and try and articulate it in a way that means that they don't have to do it themselves, then, you know, for some people that's good because they want the representation.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, that was kind of a part of the quota that I found quite difficult. So I know that the idea of misery tourism and running games about themes like that, one of the criticisms you often get is people saying, well, you know, it's okay for you to play in this world for 48 hours or 72 hours or however long it is, but you know, that's disrespectful. But actually, for some people, they want to be represented, and they want to know that the world outside of their immediate circle knows that they exist and cares.
So, it can be a way of being heard and feeling that thing, and empathy.
Give us an upbeat one to finish on, Aquarian.
Yeah, sure. In your opinion, what would be the worst existing intellectual property to make a LARP out of?
I thought that so hard.
Ian.
No, I'm going to cede the floor to someone else on this one.
I mean, my obvious answer right now is Harry Potter, but that's got a whole load of nuance in it. I don't particularly want to go into.
It's got layers now.
Oh no, Mills and Boon love stories.
Oh,
granny porn.
The hair and everything.
some granny porn from Mills and Boon, or the kind of like the top shelf erotic fantasy that you used to be able to buy in service stations before they banned them.
That's
pretty bad.
I really struggle with, and I've quite a few people know this already about me, that I can't stand fandom LARP games, because I always feel there's an issue with them in that someone knows it all, but there's also a design issue of that's great, but everyone interprets it differently. So I see Star Wars games, well, I'm going to run a Star Wars game, and I look at it and go, oh, that's not my understanding of Star Wars. Like, to me, the Jedi were actually just as bad as the Empire. Like, whereas some people look at them as these great heroes of the galaxy. I think there's problems that come in from that, of which parts are you, especially when you pull bits apart and we're not going to use that, and we're going to use this bit. I think there's definitely an issue where you might end up with conflict in your game when someone takes one bit of it, like Harry Potter with some of the crap that she who should not be named likes to post online involving toilets. And yeah, the problems it could all cause. You're a troll. Yeah, so I don't. But I
was surprised. I was surprised that didn't come up in the books you should read.
Sorry, Rob.
Before we move on to the works of Ian Andrews, I don't think they're bad things. I think a lot of it's a personal thing for me because I just see it seems quite a lot of flaws in them. I understand why people try and do them. I just don't quite understand why. I'd like to see some worlds. It's nice to be something inspired by something, but I want to write my own story. I don't want to be an extra in an existing story. Actually, I've got one. King Arthur. Anything to do with King Arthur, that's straight up King Arthur, drives me crazy because it's been done 50 million times. Can people please stop running King Arthur plots?
I mean, so I'm part of the Death Unto Darkness ref team, so you know, I have to put in a word for 40k LARP as being something you can create your own stories in. But and especially since we're creating stories that really, really piss off the Facebook group, it's fantastic. If you were creating fandom LARPs, if you were creating, then there is always something in an aspect of the universe that you can take and create your own. My favorite example is, for example, stuff like Knights of the Old Republic, where they were given a Star Wars license and decided that the best thing they could do is create a brand new Star Wars universe thousands of years in the past where they could do what the fuck they liked and it wouldn't affect normal canon. And if I was given something like Harry Potter to write on, or James Bond, a James Bond universe LARP just wouldn't work because everyone wants to be James Bond. And there's no point in being in a James Bond universe LARP if you're not James Bond. And that kind of universe that doesn't exist without the central character.
Can I be Mayday?
Okay. Any universe that doesn't exist without the central character would be hard to do things in. But if the universe itself is interesting in any way, shape, or form, then you could probably create something somewhere in a niche of it that would be interesting to the people who already knew about that universe. But it's not like the market's going to be great for it. I mean, you could pick something with obscure and complicated systems that you could never put into a LARP, like Ars Magica or something. But I don't know where you go with that.
Oh, I've got one. However, I would like to play a Pokemon LARP because I would like to dress up and wrestle people.
We're venturing into Rob's Mr. Mime fetish territory here.
No.
It's not a fetish.
Oh, good.
True story. We can't discuss
We're not talking about
Ash's stepdad.
We're not talking about Ash.
Can we not and say we didn't?
I think for me, it would either be something. There's nothing specific that's leaping into mind at the moment, although something like the Pokemon LARP that it would be very difficult for you to realize in an effective way without it looking just terrible. You'd have to find some way to make it work. If you can't realize it in a realistic type of way, it's not worth doing. Or anything where you have an issue with licensing, that if you're going to do something which resembles but legally distinct from, get the license or don't bother, because it will always look like the pale copy of the thing, and it looks like the kind of the happy shopper generic off-brand version of the thing, so it won't turn out the way that you want it to.
It won't be enough like the universe for the people who want it to be enough like the universe, and for the people who don't care about the universe, they didn't care in the first place.
So I've been sat here thinking, I don't know if you've been able to see the cogs churning in my face, but that's what's been going on. And what I've come up with is IPs that I wouldn't like seeing turn into a LARP includes Top Gear, because getting cars on and off of fields is bad enough just for setting up events. I would hate the event to be about that.
More logistical issues.
And also all of the kind of like macho bullshit stuff I'm not really interested in. I am a car nerd, like I am a car dickhead, but I'm not really into the macho bullshit for obvious female red reasons. The other one is Super Mario Brothers, because I think that it would be terrible unless you made the film version of the film into a LARP, but I'm not quite sure that actually is Mario Brothers. It's better than
you can't. I mean, So there is a line between aren't able to phys rep, which is covered by you can use your imagination, and LARPers are needing to use their imagination, and that's fine. But anything where you can't do the central conceit without not being able to phys rep it. So actually, to answer the actual question, Avatar. Avatar is a fantastic...
Which Avatar?
If there's more than one Avatar? The one that exists?
Blue
The one
elves.
that exists or the one that does not actually exist?
Yeah.
Blue elves.
Okay.
Or
the cartoon is the one that actually exists. Everything else is a figment of James Cameron's imagination. And the movie of the cartoon just doesn't even exist as a figment of James. You see?
No.
So Avatar, the cartoon, is a fantastic universe with distinct factions that you could very easily build a LARP plot around, with distinct characters, with fantastic NPCs, with everything else, that would be completely destroyed by the fact that you couldn't actually do the interesting thing about the universe, in that none of the people could be an element bender of any kind, because you wouldn't be able to phys rep it and it would look shit if you tried.
Yes.
So beyond the kind of so there are reasons why you wouldn't want to do a LARP around Preacher, for example, that involve not wanting to go near that universe. And that's one reason not to do it. And it folds back to the previous question. But also, if you can't do the universe justice within a LARP concept without losing having to slice off important bits of the franchise, just don't.
So for me, I'm really, really bored of COD Western European fantasy. God, I am bored of it. Please, no adaptation of The Witcher for LARP. No adaptation of Cursed for LARP. And you know they're coming. You can smell them. It's all been done so many times before, and there's nothing new in it. There's nothing exciting in it. It's the same old tropes given a new lick of paint. But if I had to pick the single worst existing intellectual property to make a LARP out of, I think it would be 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh.
Oh no.
Thanks for that.
Because you know for a fact that there are hundreds of LARPers out there, and I've even gone Yorkshire to say this, who would bloody pay for that?
Yeah.
Because it's you know, it's
what,
there's a big crossover there.
You will make a ticket, I'll say that right now.
Let's disappoint.
Anyway,
but
there's the answer.
yeah,
Still available
let's
on
do a
Amazon.
Pearls That Were His Eyes yet.
Yeah. What's this book called? The Pearls That Were His Eyes.
So I think we would probably get the licensing rights to that, but you know, we'd have to push on them to get a sequel so that we could get the.
I made quite a lot of money off that a very long time ago.
Buy it on Lulu and we get more commission.
Yeah, this is fair.
And if you have read the book and you love it, please recommend to people.
If you have read the book and you don't love it,
wasn't it?
So, I mean, back to the Witcher thing. So, The Witcher is a prime example of a universe that does not exist without the main character in it.
Yeah.
As in, everybody will want to play a Witcher, except for the people who want to play the Bard. And sorry, assuming you're meaning the TV series. If you go back to the book series, then, well, first we go into the previous example of themes that you do not think should be role played, but also the world that in the books is quite big and varied, but still centers around witches a bit too much. And there isn't a lot for other things to do, and that's the key thing. If you can't be the hero in the stories that you're telling, tell a different story. I think that's enough for one evening. We've still got 13 questions left to go.
Yeah.
So I think we may have to delay those till next week. So thank you, people, for watching. I assume people actually watched this. That's any closing words?
Bold assumption.
It's a bold assumption, but people did actually ask the questions, and I'm
Yeah,
not answering the
yeah.
questions in Curiosity Cat, so they're going to have to watch the video anyway. Any closing words before we go?
We will do other videos where people can see answers to the other questions at a future date. So if yours hasn't been answered yet, keep looking, and there's chances are that your question will be answered in one of those.
We have a brand new YouTube channel, and this is news to the other four, but this is a thing that exists. And
the comments off.
We've got a YouTube platform.
That's sweet.
And this video will go up on that, and I'll put links into the question answers so you can see that your questions have been answered.
YouTube, shout out to Edmondo,
Shut up,
hero.
Robert.
Okay, let's wrap this up then.
Right. In which case, thank you and good night.
Thank you,
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.